would you say that once you were on the team, how do you tend to work with the sound guys, for example? Do you ever say do you ever ask them if they could, maybe if they're going out to record some sound effects, if you could borrow some of them? How does something like that work? Are you even allowed to ask that of them, or do you have to go out and get your own samples or own recordings every time?
The relationship with the sound team on games obviously is different from game to game. But in my experience, the bigger games, which usually have a longer schedule and a bigger team, always have more time for that sort of collaboration where I can send them sketches or ideas of things. They will send me sound effects that they've recorded. There was a game I was doing with Warner Brothers, which unfortunately got canceled 4 years ago when this big shift happened in the industry. But they were sending me all of the sound effects that they were recording. And it was all these like demolition, building, crashing and smashing and big hits and things. And I was incorporating them into the music. But I think it's important to say, I wasn't just taking like a shattered window pane, let's say, and dropping it in as a sound effect and having it play the way it would normally play. Because then you're starting to get to the point where you're blurring the line between, is that something I heard in the game or is that part of the score? And I think it's important that if you're using naturally occurring sounds, whether it's glass breaking or an animal making noise, it's important that it's treated and produced in such a way that it has a musical intent and not a sound design intent. And I was always really careful. I was making drum kits, bass, snares, and cymbals from these destruction recordings that they had. And they sounded more like drums than they sounded like the sound effects. But the important things to me were, number one, they were original and unique and completely tailored for that game. And number two, they were actually based off the sound design from the game. So even if no one really realized it, if they were playing the game, there was a natural correlation there. There was a relationship between the music and the sound design. And that's just one of the many things I think we do as creative people. It gives fuel to us and it sort of energizes us to try new things. It might not be a revelation on the listener's part. Oh my gosh, that drum set sounds just like when the building exploded. That's kind of an impossible conclusion to come to, but the end result is sort of the proof in the pudding to me, because if I didn't have those recordings, it wouldn't sound that way. It would be, some found sound, like sample produced thing, or me doing something on my own. It's always better to have that collaboration and conversation with the developers.
Right. And so for example, in contrast, if I'm looking at orchestral elements and orchestral weird techniques, like, I keep bringing up Dead Space because I have the most experience with those games. How do you go about curating some of those techniques? How do you even go about going up to an orchestra and then saying, all right, you play this odd sound thing that's going to make this specific sound, and then you're going to do that thing, which is, you might not ever have done that before, but you're going to do that thing on a constant basis. How do you even go about telling an orchestra what to play when it comes to that?
There's definitely a challenge with, I'll just say aleatoric, because that's the general sort of 20th century standard for it. For aleatoric music, which most people would just say sounds like scary music, but I've done some aleatoric stuff with major chords, where I just tell all the string players to, pick one of these notes, and maybe it's a C major 7 chord. And they're playing all their own stuff, and they're doing the chants part of aleatory, but it's a major chord, so it sounds beautiful. It's all about the restraints you put on them. But as far as prepping the sessions and figuring out what things are going to sound like before you record them, I did a lot of research. I think something like 4 months of research with aleatoric music. I spent the better part of a day every week driving to a nearby university that has a really nice music library. And I was able to do a lot of photocopies of scores, which you can't even purchase.
Right.
Ligeti and Penderecki and all those sort of classic, like, pioneers in avant-garde aleatoric kinds of music. And
Right.
I bought all the albums I could, and I read the scores, and I listened to the music. And I think the smartest thing I did, besides studying up for months beforehand, and when I say months, I mean I was only working on Dead Space. So if I spent 3 months doing this, that was my full-time job. So 1 day a week I was going to the library. The other 4 days of the week I was poring over the scores, and I was making notes and writing down examples and things like that. But the smartest thing that I did was I didn't have just one recording session, because the easiest way to know what something's going to sound like is to put it in front of a player and have them perform it, right? That's the obvious answer, but you can't just run a test with 40 strings. Now, what you can do,
Right.
and I've done this in the past, is if maybe I was going to be writing for string quartet and I wanted to know what some of these sounds were, you can send them to the players if it's just 4 players and just say, would you just play these 4 measures and record them with your phone real quick for me? Like the next time you're practicing, before you do your scales or whatever, or just a solo instrument. A lot of composers have musicians friends that play things, and it's always great getting a live performer's feedback on things. So I didn't really know anyone at the time. I couldn't send any parts out. And I don't even know if that was a possibility I considered back in 2007, 2006, when I was first doing all the research. But I knew that I didn't want to have one big recording session because I was afraid that I wouldn't do a good job and then I'd blow my entire budget and I'd be left with nothing. So I split it up into thirds. And that way, number one, I didn't have to prep as much music for the session. Number two, if it was completely awful and nothing was salvageable, I still had 2 more sessions left. And then number three, I would be able to have that first session, hear how everything sounded, give feedback on the podium to get the kind of sound maybe I was looking for, and then take all of that knowledge and put it into the next 2 sessions. And I think between Dead Space
Right.
1 and 2, I had 6 sessions total. And by the time I got to about session 4, I knew exactly what I wanted to put down. And I knew more or less what it would sound like when they played it. Those first 3 sessions, I think 90% of everything was usable and good. But occasionally there'd just be something where it would be like, yeah, I mean, that's fine, but it's not really doing anything for me. And sometimes I'd even just go, okay, stop, next cue. And we'd go to the next cue because it just wasn't, it wasn't what I was hoping.
Right.
That's a very long-winded answer, but that's the general idea.
No, I mean, that's fine. I've done a thesis in my previous year, and that was exactly on aleatoric music and trying to find out whether there is a naming scheme for the different techniques, and it's just such a gray area that I think sort of the conclusion that I found is that the amount of people that you talk to about it, the many different answers that you're gonna get, there's not one way forward. Like if you were to compose a classical piece, there's sort of weird areas where it depends on how you approach it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I find that fascinating how composers like you sort of twist the orchestra in weird and different ways to make different sounds. And that's just something I really find interesting. Now, the one thing that cannot be said is everyone finds that interesting. So what were some of the you did get widespread critical acclaim on a lot of your games, which, I mean, Until Dawn had some really, really good reception. Of course, Dead Space, I don't think I even need to mention that. What were some of the negative criticisms that you've got? Was there anyone that sort of didn't, I'm not gonna say understand, but sort of couldn't get into that aleatoric elements of Dead Space, or was that generally just accepted?
As far as negative criticism, I think probably the first person I would point to is myself, especially with that first Dead Space game, because by the time I got about 2/3 of the way through, normally that's kind of the 50% or the 60% mark of finishing something is like the supreme comfort mark, because I'm finally feeling like the score, whatever game it is, has some definition. It's got a particular kind of sound, and I've tried things and things have worked and things have sort of solidified, and now I'm coasting almost on all the creative work I put ahead of time, and it's very freeing, and I get more and more excited about the score as we get closer to the end, and then I get to do all these cinematics and things and use themes, and it's really, really a nice kind of timeline. And with Dead Space, it was not like that at all. I never really hit my stride because I was constantly having to basically take the recording sessions and build instruments that I could use to write the music with up until the very, very end. And when I hit that sort of 50, I think it was like 60 or 65% through mark, I was just brain dead. I was becoming so used to the gnashing of teeth and grinding of strings and brass clusters that everything sounded not scary. And I kept feeling like I needed to amp it up, and I needed to make it bigger, and I needed to make it scarier, and it needed to be, more grating and more over the top. And while I say I was kind of immune to it, it also, at the end of the day, was just exhausting. I'd be just completely wiped out by the end of the day. And literally, I remember doing the last cinematic, which was the last cinematic of the game. And I got a little excited because I got to do a bit of tonal music with sort of Nicole's theme when Isaac gets back to the ship and like sort of takes off his helmet or rests or does whatever. There was a moment of tension relief. That was nice because it was a little bit of music in terms of tonality, but everything else I was just thinking, what am I doing? Like, this game, this soundtrack, everyone's gonna hate this. It is so over the top and just it's just like grating. I can't even listen to some of this stuff anymore. It's driving me insane. And it turns out all those reasons that I was sick of it and I didn't like it because I've been living with it 8 hours a day for the past, I don't know how many years. That was what turned a lot of people's ears in the setting of the game and made it really, really work, is it just sort of reached out through the screen and grabbed you by the neck and never let go. And because of the genius programming of the developers, it's the exact kind of music that sort of game needed. And I think it matched up really, really well. And that's why it sounded sort of internally with a lot of horror fans, because it was kind of like the best horror movie experience, just kind of on 10 all the time. And that was great. That was wonderful to hear. I was honestly very surprised that it got any attention at all, because you have to realize it was just a little tiny team, and we spent like 3 years on the game and really didn't know if it was going to be a blip or if it was going to be a hit. And fortunately, it was the hit and not the blip.
Yeah, and it remained a hit ever since then. It gained quite a bit of fan following, and it maintained that following even today. I think Dead Space was and is like one of the big sci-fi horror games still that people, if you ask someone, they're gonna be able to name.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's if I ever meet someone like maybe one of my wife's friends and their husband's there, and of course we're, well, hey, what do you do? And we get to talking about what I do. A lot of times, just as a test, I'll say, oh, well, yeah, I did like did Tomb Raider, and I did like a Far Cry game, and they're like, oh yeah, cool, and I'll kind of leave Dead Space off the list, and we'll talk about something, and I'll say, oh, and I did
That's gonna be
this
the trump
series.
card.
Well, yeah, I did this series called Dead Space, and every time their eyes get really wide, and they're like, you did Dead Space? I think it left its mark, and it's very, very humbling and exciting to be involved with that. Especially so early on with that team. It was an incredible experience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt it. It must have been great. But going back on the 8 hours a day, I suppose if you're listening to 8 hours of prog every day for a couple of months, it's gonna get boring the same way, like anything really.
Yeah,
So
like pick your favorite meal. I don't. If it's like gourmet, some like amazing gourmet meal, you don't want to have it 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. It's just.
Yeah.
It's right.
Yeah.